Yep, I've moved and I'm ready to share with you how that went from a smart home perspective. We all know how stressful and frustrating moves can be in general, and when you add a smart home to that mix, it can be a whole other level of pain. Hello automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and today I'm going to take the frustration out of automation seriously because a move can be one of the most difficult things that people do when you have a ton of stuff. And now, as you add in these smart home components, how do you handle that? Now, I'm going to give you my experience, what it was like, but I'm also going to give you a lot of tips and tricks. And they're not just going to be tips and tricks for when you go to move and you'll be able to implement them now. These are things you should be implementing now, and they will help you if you ever have to replace any of your smart home devices in general. So let's get going. Now let's start with the situation that I was walking into with this. I have over 70 Wi-Fi devices, and I've shown you guys some of this here with different videos on the channel, and I have over 50 Zigbee and Z-Wave products. It's getting a little ridiculous, and even though I'm giving away lots of products to friends and family and colleagues, I'm still ending up with a ton of devices at this point just to keep up with the industry. So lots of these devices were brand new, but some of them were fairly old and had been sitting in my home for 3 to 5 years in some cases. So we had a real gambit of things to deal with as we left. I also had 5 fully implemented, or at least in service, smart home hubs. So I had Philips Hue, Samsung SmartThings. Those are kind of my primaries. I also had SwitchBot, which was really managing my gym, so not critical in terms of moving. And I had Hubitat, which I was really just doing testing and playing with a lot for the channel. And then on top of that, I had the IKEA Tradfri hub as well. So 5 hubs to move. Now that doesn't count Google or Amazon and all the devices I have from them. And with Amazon, I kind of took this as an opportunity to restart really fresh with Amazon. I'm a Canadian customer and I really wanted access to all of the American services and features that we just don't get. So I actually took this opportunity to just take everything out of that Canadian account and start fresh in an American account. So while that was the situation going in, there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of keep in mind and be my basis here for this move. And the first thing really is that I didn't want to leave anything behind. No man was left behind here in this move. And really the reason for that is some of these devices, and you're going to struggle figuring out which ones they are, will contain some information. So you don't want to necessarily leave that behind. It could contain Wi-Fi credential information. It could contain personal information or your login. So you kind of got to watch that. So I didn't want to leave anything behind as number one. And the second basis really was that I didn't want to change a lot. So I didn't want to be changing a bunch of settings before I came over or after I was here, because that adds to the complexity of troubleshooting should you run into any problems. So with those two things in mind, I started to prepare my home. And some of the simple tips with hubs and Wi-Fi devices, if you can take your router or at least copy down your Wi-Fi credentials and your security that you're using, take that with you and put it into the new router or the new access points when you get to your new place. That will mean all of your Wi-Fi devices will just reconnect and get working right away as long as they have a good signal where you are. Now, the other thing that is really important as you come into a home is to minimize, you don't know what interference you're going to have from networks from your neighbor. So you want to minimize this, and you also want to maximize where your hubs are located. Now, there are directions for antennas that we have shown on the channel before, and specifically I've shown Samsung SmartThings where their Zigbee and Z-Wave antennas point, where their Wi-Fi antennas point if they have one, and how that kind of all works. So you want to try and locate them. And if you're struggling with locating, because let's be honest, as you buy a new home or as you go and get a new place, well, you're not necessarily going to be able to plan everything out. So one of the tips or tricks that I have been using for a long time is the Ethernet over power devices, and this allows me to go and locate my hubs really anywhere without having to run Ethernet cabling, and I can use a little unmanaged switch to attach to all of them, and this makes it easy to locate them wherever I want in my new home. So what I want you to do is to pick a good central location that will not necessarily have a lot of interfering networks from your neighbors, and this will help you get started in a really simple and quick way. Now within those hubs, there's one little tricky part that you might want to watch out for, and this goes for the Google and the Amazon and SmartThings and all of your hubs that have a security component. Well, they have a location in them, and something you could do is before you unplug them, actually change their address location to your new location so that when you plug them in, they're instantly expecting you to be in that area. And that means, you know, for something like SmartThings again, that it recognizes when you leave your home and reminds you to put on your security system or automatically turns it on. Other than that little tidbit, really most of the smart home hubs move on their own as long as they have a good network connection. There's really no problems. But the one caveat to this was actually in the end devices. And so when I had battery-based devices, so this is a good example, a button here, it's a Z-Wave button, and what I noticed is that lots of the batteries actually drained on lots of my sensors. You know, what I think they were doing is sitting there trying to connect and reconnect and really just searching a lot for that Zigbee network. And maybe when I got here as well, they were trying to connect again through a lot of interference because they were in boxes and buried under equipment and material. And so you know what? I found some of them that were dead. Now, because I had been really careful about not changing a lot, it was easy to quickly troubleshoot that, oh, my battery's dead here. I just need to replace that. But keep that in mind. That is something that happened in the matter of a couple of days. I lost 40 to 50% on some of my sensors. And in some cases, those devices reconnected immediately once I had plugged in my hub, but they don't always do that. And so you have to actually be a little bit patient here. That's my recommendation for you, because in a lot of cases, Zigbee or Z-Wave networks take time to repair themselves. So kind of plug in your stuff. If it's a light bulb or a light switch or whatever device it is, if it's Zigbee and Z-Wave, give it some time, let it just sit there and let the network kind of self-repair, and just be patient with that. And if you do that, 90% of things will come back. You might have to reboot your hub every once in a while. And really, once I did that 2 or 3 times, rebooted my hub and let devices kind of sit there, everything came back online with those networks. The next thing to really talk about is really those physical components of this move, because these are physical devices that we're dealing with. And when you talk about a light socket or a power socket rather, or a light switch, then you have something you physically installed in your home. And the Nest Protect is another great example of something like that. If you've changed to a smart smoke or CO detector, well, you have these physical components installed in your home. And during those installations, if you weren't careful or you weren't thinking about how you would back out from this, it can be a bit of a tricky situation. And a great example of this is a little sawn-off switch stuck in behind a light switch. You probably ended up having to cut your wire short, add some other wires, and you know, this might be a problem to kind of back out of. So those are things you want to look at early, and you know, a Nest Protect is another great example of something you want to look at early and maybe even take out of your home before you list the home and have people looking. And the reason I say that is in a lot of cases, you kind of have to leave whatever's attached to your walls. So you want to think about this even before you go and list your home. And really, you want to have been thinking about this when you did the installation so that you made sure you had enough wire sitting there to reconnect, say, an old light switch or an old smoke and CO detector. Something that I think will surprise a lot of people here actually is, you know, we get these 3M tapes on sensors and smart home devices, and then we go and we stick them on our walls and those things never move, and that's great. But what I will tell you is that stuff is way overkill, and it becomes really difficult to deal with. And there's a couple of methods I'm going to give you here in a minute, but in general, what I've been doing over time is I've been learning to use less and less of that 3M tape and actually cut off the original manufacturers, or just peel it off when I get it, or just not use it, and then use something smaller or little strips of it. And that's what I would say is one of the biggest things, is the little strips of it instead of the full backing is more than enough. Your devices stay on the wall. I've never had one fall, and I've even been using kind of a two-sided tape. It's called POAC or POAC. We can't figure out how to say it, but that has been very effective, and in small strips, you won't rip up your wall. Now, a couple of tricks with this that I learned. Heat gun is a very powerful thing to loosen up the glue on the back of 3M tape, and you do have to be careful with that because you can still kind of weaken your wall or weaken your paint and still peel things off. But the other thing that you can really do with that is a little bit of fishing wire actually in behind, and you want it to be a good quality fishing wire. Don't get cheap because it just breaks off in behind. Lots of these are really stuck to the wall, and you just kind of come down and you will loosen it, and you might have to go through the whole device a couple of times. So this is not going to be a quick process, and you need to be patient, but with a little bit of heat and a little bit of fishing wire, you can actually get most of these off without ripping off lots of paint in your home. Now, in all of this, there was one thing that I did that was really simple, and I think it was probably the smartest thing I did, is anything I took out of my home, I labeled. And as soon as I took a smart bulb out, or a smart switch, or a smart whatever, and just said what it was, what the name was in the previous space. And that meant when I went to the new place, I could put those things back in the same location, or at least if I didn't, I still knew what I was putting in there, and I knew which hub it connected to, and I knew all of those things that allowed me to adjust the name and adjust the automations and adjust what I needed to. And this made the process actually really seamless, and it allowed me to install things kind of room by room and really just go about things in a very expedient way. Now, no matter what you do, there are going to be some tricky moments if you do move your smart home, or just if you have to replace a lot of different components. Now, if you have more questions about this process, feel free to let me know down below, and hopefully some of these tips and tricks will help you going forward. I really want you guys to think about this as you install some of these devices. And so if it has helped you, make sure you join the channel. Hit that subscribe button right now. Join us here on Automate Your Life. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching, and of course, don't hate, automate.